Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, that's great.
How's it going?
Yeah, good. Thank you. What time is it there anyway? By the way, just out of interest.
What was that?
What time is it where you are?
It's 8:30 in the morning.
Oh wow, it's early. Oh wow, it's half past one here. So yeah.
One in the afternoon or one in the morning?
Oh, in the afternoon. Yeah, in the
Oh,
afternoon.
good.
But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I just wanted to chat actually. I was interested. I had a look on some of your career and some of the work that you've done, and watched some of your interviews on YouTube and obviously you worked on the mask as well, didn't you? So
Yeah, yeah. I only had I've had a pretty small involvement with it, but it was at the very beginning. Um, I just had arrived at Industrial Light and Magic just before the 1990s. So I think I actually arrived like in 19 like at the very like maybe November or just the end of the year in 1989. So I never really count that because it's just easier to say I started in 1990 because something weird about saying it, yeah, I started in 1989. But um, like within the first year I was there, Chuck Russell had in development a movie based on the science fiction novel Neuromancer that he had the rights to the story. If I can't recall, I seem to recall that he owned the actual rights to the book, and had written a script, and that he had approached Industrial Light and Magic to possibly work on the visual effects, and he was putting together a pitch to show the studios of what his vision for that whole universe was like. And in a weird way, that Neuromancer property predated the Matrix. It had a cyberspace component, but I think it was called it had a slightly different name. It wasn't the metaverse like now. It was like cyberspace. I think maybe the name cyberspace came from Neuromancer, but at any rate, it had to do with people who could hack into this virtual world through their computers, and they had like VR capability, and
interesting.
they
It reminds me actually. Chuck he'd worked on Dreamscape, which is a
right.
bit like Inception. So it's
Yeah.
it's funny how these projects sort of are influenced by so many things. I mean that's very interesting to know that actually.
Yeah, I was really interested in Neuromancer because I had read the books, William Gibson, and I had read those prior to moving to California when I was when I was living in Dallas, Texas. And they made a really profound the whole cyberpunk universe that was kind of growing out of Gibson and some of the other authors, was really exciting to me. And so being new to the company and kind of trying to establish myself, as a player, as a commodity, I was extremely motivated to be engaged with projects. And so when Chuck's project showed up inside of ILM, I volunteered to do artwork for it. And it just so happened that he was trying to get it ready to present to the studios in the early part of the year. So the work requests had come in before the Christmas holidays. But if I remember right, it was like somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? Very close to the end of the year. And I think I was so excited, and I had just gotten to California that I was like, I'll work over the holidays. I don't care. And I do remember like being the only person in the building, minus the security staff who were, watching out for stuff. And I remember working on stuff for Neuromancer. And I tell you all that because I got to engage with Chuck quite a great deal because I was alone, you know. I know that some other artists did some work on Neuromancer that were inside of ILM. There was a sculpture made in the sculpting department of what a character might look like in cyberspace or in this, you know, environment. But what I remember is that Chuck gave me a lot of leeway to do, you know, anything I kind of wanted that related to the script. And I did stuff that was like, I remember I did a robot that was like a crab that was you know, something that trimmed hedges and that was mentioned in the book. And I did weapons. I remember I did some kind of weapon that Chuck was really excited about. And then in the beginning of that, I want to say it was in 1991, but I'd have to look at an actual map because I think the Gulf War started right
around that time. Yeah, around that time. Yeah, it was around the 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we had all the ILM artwork had all been mounted on presentation boards, and there was this sculpture, as I mentioned, and everything was loaded into a like somebody's SUV or a truck, and the decision was made to drive it down because it was going to be hard to get it through the airport. Because, you know, Industrial Light and Magic is in Northern California, just above San Francisco, and then all the studios are down in Los Angeles, and that's about that's like a 7-hour drive.
That's quite a way away. Yeah, it's quite a journey. Yeah.
So we drove down. I think Steve Beck, if I remember correctly, who was the head of the ILM Arts Department, and I drove all that stuff down there. And then the war broke out, and then Chuck was very concerned, of course, that the war would polarize make it like, how do we concentrate on making movies when there's this calamity unfolding? And I think it made financing that picture difficult. And then that property was set aside then at that point. And I think it's really unfortunate because he was really ahead of his time with all of that stuff. And I think it would have been
a great film. A great film.
A really good film. Yeah.
It's funny. It kind of reminds me of. It reminds me of what happened to Mad Max Fury Road. That was supposed to be in 2000 or 2001, and then the Iraqi War broke out, so then they had to stop the film because they were worried it was, you know, polarizing, or, you know, I suppose I can understand to a degree, you know, I suppose like an apocalyptic dystopian film, you know, in 2001, and, you know, it's like 9/11 and all that kind of that times. But then since then he made the film, and I think I don't know if you've seen Fury Road, but they're making it.
Yeah.
I mean, they're making another Mad Max film, like a prequel, Furiosa.
Yeah, that's the biggest one yet, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I remember feeling really, because I was so attached to the property, the Neuromancer property, and because it was like a project where had a lot of, like I was working with a director who was just saying, show it to me. You know, I was doing crap that, you know, I was drawing stuff that wouldn't have really even been part of the visual effects work. I was just stuff that I thought would be cool in that world. I was very disappointed. I also thought it was really strange. You know, my life is, at some point, you know, we could talk at some point about, like, my life is just filled with these strange connectors, and where something will happen and connect me to something, and then that thing will connect me to something else. And it seems like, you know, like, to me, I mean, it's my life, so I can say I don't think there's anything supernatural about my existence, in the sense that there's some supernatural element to it other than my own belief in, like, some mystic realm or something. But I've had this just uncanny trajectory to bump into things, and then later on bump into them again and then again. And it's like, when I was so when I'm in Dallas, Texas, I'm interested in this William Gibson science fiction neuromancer cyberpunk thing that most people don't know about. It was a very popular book. It won the Nobel, award, but most average people didn't know what cyberspace was, didn't know what neuromancer was. So to then go forward like 6 years or 5 years or however many it was, and then just be like, oh, here's that project that you've been thinking so much about that made such an impact on you. That I had been doing drawings, on my own. I had my own ideas. It had a lot to do with graphic design and erotica, and everything that I was interested in kind of was changed by the Neuromancer property. So then not only does it show up, but then Chuck actually, now that I'm telling you, I think he owned the property outright. I mean, I think he had bought it somewhere. So like he had it exclusively. And even when we were doing that early artwork, I think most people were like, I don't get it. Like, what do you go into a computer? They were thinking about Tron, like you go into a computer world like Tron, and Chuck's like, no, it looks like a city, but it's
like digital. A world. It's like a whole world,
Yeah.
It's like
Ready Player One, did it? I mean,
yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's like I was thinking as well. William Gibson, right? That was who was the writer. Yeah, I think he did the New Rose Hotel.
Yeah, that's the same characters.
It's the same characters, right? And then Johnny Mnemonic.
Right, Johnny Mnemonic, Mona Lisa Overdrive. I'd read all of the stuff that Gibson had written. So anyway, then after the war started, then Chuck shut down the project, or it got shut down. I don't remember that very well. I just remember it ended. But so then at some point, and I could probably go through my notes. I don't keep great notes, but I do have some historical notes around here, like what I did when. So I can't remember if it was after Jurassic Park or if it was right at the same time. I know that at some point I was just called into a meeting about the mask with, I think the ILM producer was Clint Goldman.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And they were going to try to shoehorn it in. Like, I remember that there was this, like, ILM wasn't very big back in those days. And the digital effects group, like the group who worked on Jurassic Park was tiny. Like, even when you counted like the stage and support through optical and everything, it was like less than 50 people. The people that actually were involved with doing work on computers was like probably like 30 people. And so there wasn't a lot of bandwidth to bring in additional projects, like you could saturate ILM and there was no more room. Like, there was the resources were depleted. And I know that I was working on another show, so it could have been Jurassic, or it could have been it could have been something else, but my memory
I think it was Jurassic, because it was just like, because it was around that time, it was 93, 94, so it would have just been going into kind of production, so it would have just been, Jurassic would have just come out, and I think, ILM were, it was like Terminator 2, there's a whole bunch of productions and stuff, and I think Dreamscape, not Dreamscape, DreamQuest was another company as well that worked on, did effects as well. So it's
well, there was, one of the things that really opened the door for like digital effects on a new level was the technology that allowed for 35 millimeter plate photography to be scanned and then brought into the work, the digital work environment, and then outputted to 35 millimeter that could be released into the theaters because it was all still film, right? And ILM, I think, they had several technologies that other effects houses, small effects startups understood, but I'm not sure they had access to it. so ILM had a technical advantage with regards to the pipeline, how you actually take physical film and put it into a format that can be manipulated digitally and then put it back out as something that could be released. And then they had gotten ahead on you know, some of the really inventive ways of approaching the you know, the 3D environment, the digital environment. So Clint Goldman, he was kind of a young gun producer inside of ILM. He was part of like the Young Turks that were part of the, you know, like there was Steve Williams.
Steve Williams, yeah. I've spoken to Steve. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah,
Steve's great,
Mark DePay.
Ellen Poon. I've spoken to Ellen Poon as well.
Ellen was. Yeah, I was in that. We had different names for that group, but that was the circle that I traveled in with.
And Benton
Jew.
Yeah, great as well. Yeah, Benton. Yeah. He you know, he's does a lot of art as well. You know, conceptual art, and I've seen some of the ideas he had on the mask, and because you know, originally I mean, actually, it's funny. I don't suppose you were familiar with the comic of the mask.
No.
And it's like completely a different property. You know, it's like more of a horror. You know, so it's funny how it changed. It kind of married the elements, the film, you know, to kind of balance it out. You know, and yeah, I mean, I think you should definitely check out the comic. It's pretty wild, really, pretty crazy, you know. I mean, it's like you know, a bit like Nightmare on Elm Street if Freddy Krueger had the mask, you know. So
yeah,
it's yeah, definitely check it out. It was Dark Horse Comics, you know.
Yeah, you know, I've worked on multiple comic book properties, and I just that wasn't my in my field of view. Even when I worked with Del Toro on you know, Hellboy, I had no idea. I had no idea what Hellboy was until Guillermo asked me to take a look at it. Same with the Spawn. I didn't know what Spawn was. But that's just because you have limited bandwidth when you're consumer. You know, like I was always really into music, so I was buying a lot more music and focusing on like what I would have considered culture, like new culture, new wave culture, or whatever was coming up, and the kinds of focus I had were on a different end of a spectrum. I'm not judging it in any way. I just never had that much like focus on that end of the pool, as it were. but Clint called me and asked me to come to a meeting with Chuck because Chuck had asked for me. Because of the work I'd done on Neuromancer. And so I said, of course, I would be there. And it was actually at that meeting where I think we got some pages or we got a draft. I can't remember exactly, but there were some things that I did some studies of, but it really was more like there's like I can't remember, I haven't seen the film in a long time, but there's a lakeside resort or some kind of lakeside environment where like there's like some kind of a you know, a building or a club or something, I can't remember, that's like near a lake, and I did some concepts of what that could look like.
Oh yeah, I think it was like if I remember correctly, obviously like Edge City is the town, yeah, Edge City, and I remember there's like a matte painting or at the beginning, which is kind of the introduction to the kind of world. So yeah, it was like the buildings and the kind of environment. It's like a very toxic kind of Edge City, like you know, like the air is just not safe to breathe, you know, that kind of thing. So you know.
Yeah, I did some early, I mean, I'm talking about like really fast sketches. They would have been just idea sketches, mostly just to have something to talk about with the director. I don't want to make the statement too boldly, but I think I actually brought Benton Jew into that project because I was an art director and Benton was somebody who is more like a freelance artist. and he'd been working on and off for ILM for a long time, way before I got there. And I think
Yeah,
that
because he worked on. I remember in kind of his beginnings. I remember he'd worked on Ghostbusters 2. You know, so he'd been around for a couple of years. You know, I mean, he was kind of, you know,
he was very young, but he was very talented, and I just think that there was a lot of the responsibilities that came along with being a VFX art director were, you know, more, I don't want to say like, the responsibilities were beyond being able to draw. So he was really a great artist, and he kind of serviced a certain need in the art department. And he really wasn't somebody, he was mostly a support staff kind of artist. He wasn't like a lead artist. And so I think I remember that maybe it could have been me, it could have been Clint Goldman. I mean, it really doesn't matter, but Benton was brought in, and he had maybe done, it's possible that he may have met Chuck on the Neuromancer project as well. But at any rate, he really understood it right away, because I think he did know the comic, and I think he knew the Tex Avery cartoons, and he knew all the references. And I think really quickly the work that he did, you know, started to resonate with Chuck. And I think Chuck, believe it or not, I mean, I think Chuck just liked me as a person. Like he enjoyed conversation with me, and I think he enjoyed the way I thought. And I'd listen carefully, and I'd make, you know, references to other movies, and he would go, yeah, you know, like he got it. And so I think I remember, like, I was already on, I knew that when I went to the meeting with Chuck on The Mask, I wasn't going to be able to do the show. I was doing it as a courtesy to him, and as part of the ILM, you know, welcome project group, you know, like, hey, we want to work with you on your project. It sounds fantastic, you know. But I remember right away, like, when I attended that meeting, I was very limited. But I think that they were nervous about, I think there was a sense that I had a lot to offer just in organizing the project, you know, because it was because of like Benton, who could do the great artwork, wasn't going to necessarily be the best person to engage with the director, who, you know, this is a long time ago.
It's like 20. It's like 25 years. Yeah.
Ben was pretty shy back in those days. I mean, he's pretty, you know, he's pretty mature and pretty thoughtful. But in that days, he was in his 20s. You know, he was pretty quiet. So he wasn't somebody that was going to like engage with the team, you know. And so I kind of just, I seem to recall like that was the role. And Steve Williams, he was probably on something else too, if my memory serves me, but he got it. And I think I don't think he had really met Chuck or worked with Chuck on the Neuromancer stuff. I could be wrong about that, but I kind of think that he needed to sort of build his relationship with Chuck early. And that was part of what the early engagement was try to get the right people in the room and try to get people to communicate on the right topics. And so I remember being in those meetings. I remember that, see, in my mind, that like the brilliance of what Chuck did was, he, like you said, he found a property that like you're mentioning, that had a particular resonance, you know, like a horror comic or whatever. But he could see the concept. He could see the transformative human as something that, you know, was really compelling and could be done digitally. Like just putting those thoughts together is pretty genius. But then he knew about Jim Carrey, and Jim Carrey was nobody then. Like people knew who he was from comedy in Canada and those things. But I mean, I didn't know who he was. Like I knew big when somebody said, "Oh, it's this guy." I went, "Oh yeah." But I mean, it wasn't like he was like now. He's fucking huge.
Huge, right? Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's like I think the only kind of thing that he'd been known for was he had like a cameo in the Deadpool, the Clint Eastwood film.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
You know? And he played a drug addict as well.
So he had that physicality as an actor, as a comedian, that was nuts. Like he could really transform himself just through his physicality, his control of his body. He was very vaudevillian in that way, in my mind. You know, he's kind of like a silent actor, or vaudevillian actor, because he was so like Charlie Chaplin.
Chaplin, yeah. was going to say
Yeah,
exactly like Chaplin. Yeah, you know, had that movement about him.
yeah,
You know,
and he had a really high level of self-awareness when it came to like what he was transmitting, you know. And then Cameron Diaz, he discovered, right? Because I remember being in a meeting where he said, I'm going to find the next, I don't even know who the it person was, but he said, I'm going to cast the next, you know, like Madonna. Like he was saying, you know, like,
Monroe.
I'm going to find the next person that's going to be the biggest female star. And then sure enough, he got, you know, he really kind of did it. And then it all fell into place, like in a way that was, it was really like almost impossible in the beginning to think of it would all work. I mean, it was all hard. Everything they were doing was really hard. The blending of, you know, the seamless blending of CGI and you know, practical performance. They'd done a little bit in, you know, Death Becomes Her, if that wasn't a little bit later. I mean, I think it was very close to the same time, but they started being able to do that, you know, like believably
Blend it. Yeah.
blendings and, you know, and morphing and all that shit. And so I did go, I remember meeting Jim Carrey and going to one of the photo shoots where Jim was doing proof of concepts of Jim Carrey just dressed in the zoot suit and the hat. And those were shot in one of the sound stages at ILM. And Steve was there. And I think they maybe used some of those photos to do, to manipulate, to do something Photoshoppy or
They
something.
did, yeah, they did, because I have to send it to you. They actually, at the beginning, they tried the horror kind of concept. You know, I've got some of the pictures which I'll send you, but they were kind of crazy. You know, it was a lot darker. They were just playing around, and so yeah, they were kind of testing. You know, as you said.
Yeah, and then I think the fact that Steve Williams was so into that exaggerated kind of comedy, like he as a person understood like the Tex Avery cartoons, you know, he understood that kind of really over the top calamity. And so I think that team, and then I bowed out after those photos were shot. That, you know, then it was basically a whole team that they all just fell into place and understood it all. Tom Bertino, have you heard
Oh,
that?
Tom Bertino, yeah, Tom Bertino and John Farhart. Is it John Farhart? I think his name. I've spoken to. These are kind of. There's so many. There were so many people.
Yeah.
There was just so many people. I mean, I spoke to Greg Cannon, who did the makeup as well.
Yeah.
Because you know, it was the combination, wasn't it? Like you said, you know, the combination, blend of.
Yeah. So sometimes they talk about like a perfect storm, you know, like this project, like a perfect storm of things coming together. And in my mind, as much as like, you know, working on Jurassic Park was, some of that was there as well, you know, because the property, that kind of the idea of an insect being trapped in amber that then gives you dinosaur DNA, the Crichton concepts, and then they were changing their ideas about warm-blooded and cold-blooded dinosaurs, and you had Tippett in the CGI world. It was like, it felt like this coalescing. And then it became such a huge success. But The Mask, in my mind, it was even, it was not just like one or two or even three things coming together. It was like, you know, a dozen. I mean,
everything,
like,
everything, absolutely.
Yeah, and so in a weird way, it was like magic in a bottle in a way that was only in that like 6-month window. Like there was like one 6-month window where everybody could have, like all the pieces could come together. And if it would have been 6 months earlier, it might not have been able to happen. And if it would have been 6 months to a year later, it probably wouldn't have had the same impact, because, you know, so much was changing and lots of things were happening. And so I just really thought of it as, you know, magic in a bottle, right? I mean,
it was the right time and the right moment.
Yeah, and everything worked out.
I mean, what was your reaction when you saw the film? You know, when you
well, I mean, to me, it's like one of those films where that, like, how can you not like it? You know, it's almost got something for everybody, and it's both. You know, it's got enough narrative uh, you know, enough narrative shape that you're staying interested. It's got enough, you know, heart, if there is such a thing, emotion that keeps you engaged with the characters. And then it's just got this crazy over the top like visual style that, you know, that
So unique, so
yeah,
unique, so
yeah,
unique. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So in a weird way, it's kind of a singular film. It's not been duplicated.
No,
I
no, no.
I can't see anybody ever doing a remake. I mean, they'll do remakes of everything, but I don't know why you would. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Like it's kind of perfect.
Hmm.
You
I mean,
know,
I did like Return to Oz, but it did something different. You know, it wasn't like, it wasn't kind of remake. It was kind of a sequel, but its own thing, and it's going a bit darker. So maybe I was speaking to some of the other guys, the other cast and crew, and I'm saying, you know, maybe if they did reboot it, like say everything gets rebooted, maybe if they went back to the conceit of the comic and you know, made it kind of Deadpoolish and, you know, a bit like crazier, you know, because you couldn't repeat what had been done, I don't think. So, you know, it's
yeah, you'd have to take it in a new direction, I think. But you know, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like, yeah, I feel like it was sort of a perfect film for, you know, for all the right reasons, and then it just kind of manifests in the perfect way. And then I worked it. Then I worked with Chuck like so many times after that. He always called me. But some of the, like Eraser, I worked on with him, and
Scorpion King. Did you work on the Scorpion King?
no,
No.
I was gone by then. But I did some work for him once. I was looking at ILM for 5 years, and I kept in touch with Chuck all the way through till now. I mean, I don't have much to engage with him about, but I did. He was developing a whole like angels and demons property that was called. It had two titles. One of them was Blessed Child. I think he ended up making.
Yeah, he did. He did. Yeah.
Yeah, that was with Kim Basinger, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
And
right.
I did some work on the demons in that for him. But there was another one that was also I actually went back to ILM, I think, as a consultant. I did that periodically after I left there. And he had this big other kind of like, it was like Star Wars, but with angels and devils. I mean, they flew and they had battles in clouds and shit. It was crazy. I could probably think super hard and come up with that, but I remember that project was so ambitious and so over the top. But Eric Tiemens, I think, Eric Tiemens from the Star Wars films was new then. I think he did some concepts for it, and Craig Mullins, I think we got him to do some concepts for it. And then I did some work when Chuck was going to do 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Ooh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I did some weird underwater weapons and some weird underwater shit. Yeah, and then we just, you know, like he directed, you know, I was further and further moved into another circle of, you know, projects, and that's how that all worked out.
I don't know what, he's not up to much now. I think the last picture he did was with Travolta, which yeah, that's the last thing we've done. And, he sort of, I think he's quite choosy with what he does. You know, he's quite, you know, it says it has to be something that really does evoke his interest. You know, that really does sort of has to be interesting. You know, it has to be.
Well, making movies is hard. You know, like it's hard work. So if you're
like
not,
say it's like 6 months or more of your life, and then, you know, a year or two, and then the release, and it's, you have to really, when you work on it, have a passion for it, you know, otherwise.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. I mean, I've worked on a couple of projects that I'll leave unnamed where everybody phoned it in, and it doesn't feel like worth the effort. It's you know, you need somebody who's, directors, you know, they set the tone of the film and they set the reality of its possibility. And if you don't have somebody that's enthusiastic about it, you can tell. and then it becomes an exercise in completion as opposed to an exercise in an evolution, or manifesting some new yet before to exist kind of experience. I teach now, at the university, and I always say that people ask me about movies, and I go, well, no one sets out to make a bad movie. Like, everyone sets out to make a great movie. And you have to believe, no matter how big or small your budget is, or whoever, that you're making a movie that matters, but also you might be making the greatest movie of all time. Like, you have to hold that thought in your head. And so if you have a leader or a director and they don't project that we're making the greatest movie of all time, and they don't even have to say it, they just have to behave in a way that makes it feel as though it is going to be worth everyone's efforts.
And I think that's what's so great about, obviously there's so many directors and people, and so many people. I mean, but I think Chuck, that's what Chuck was like. His vision on the mask was so that he did what he wanted to do, and I think the same with Del Toro, that you've worked with as well. He has a vision, and he like I say, you have to just motivate everyone, and do the best work that you can. You have to think that you're doing the best possible film that you can, and just do the best you can. That's all you can, and hope.
I think that it's like there's a certain level of the process that's like it deals with intention, where you've already predetermined in your mind the value of the project. Like I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's a necessity that you can see it in your mind, because that implies that you basically have a big blueprint that if you could just get it out of your head and lay it on the table, everybody could go, oh, I see what you're doing, and make it. But there's a process of discovery that goes with it. And I think my relationship with directors, including Chuck, and especially Del Toro and Jim Cameron and Neil Blomkamp, is that they need interpreters. They need people to help interpret what they have in their mind in a form, but it's not a form that's realized in a sense that you can just say, here it is. Because if they could say, here it is, then that would be clearly what people would do. They go,
it's collaborative, isn't it? It's collaborative.
Yeah.
And, you're there to help support their vision to get it.
Exactly.
To get it exactly.
Yeah, and bring something of value that dwells within you. Like I've lots of, I'm asked, like, I always say just what you were saying. I'm there at the behest of the director's vision. I service the director's vision and need, but the director expects from me something original that is different than what they would get from another person. Like Del Toro wants Ty Ellingson because I bring a certain sensibility and work with his materials, the things that he's providing me, his references, his ideas, his sensibilities, and I resonate with that. And in so doing, it's all elevated. It becomes more than the initial requests. And there's space. He creates space for me to have a meaningful participation and bring something of my own self, my own life experience, my own sensibilities, my own creativity. And in so doing that, our collaboration results in something that is greater than the sum of the parts, and certainly of more value to the director than if I just listened and fed back precisely what I heard, which would be what directors would do if they actually had it completely clear. Even with Jim Cameron, who I think understood Pandora with a really high level of fidelity. An Avatar. Like he talked in terms that were generally of what he wanted, like more like this than that. But he wanted me to bring him more, like to amplify in a meaningful way, and bring things that maybe were inspiring, unexpected to him. So then he could go, oh, that would be great if we did this. There's a
to further it, to go beyond, and to get the so much, like you say, inspiration and just add more, you know, because you say it's a team effort, it's never one person. It's the imaginations of everyone and creative people coming together and
Well, and
I mean, you know, and you know, like I suppose there was one filmmaker who did have a blueprint, and that was Hitchcock. You know, Alfred Hitchcock. He would draw his films out. You know, but that was just a one-off. I mean, that was a one filmmaker.
Yeah, but you know, he used the same people. He had relationships with his team. He had you know, he liked certain storyboard artists. He liked certain production design people. Like, you know, he in my mind, Hitchcock was sort of compartmentalizing things for the purposes of making it formulaic. Like, he wanted control with less knobs. You know what I mean? Like, so whereas somebody is mixing a movie on a mixer that has like 60 knobs, Hitchcock was trying to get it down to what are the 9 knobs that I need, you know? Bernard Herrmann, you know, they do the soundtrack, and you know, there's a lot of similar. If you get beyond the invention of Hitchcock films, there's certain things that are very similar. And his controlling aspect, what he was trying to control was control. He was controlling control, right? Like, the actors didn't really need to act; they just needed to do the things the storyboard said, you know. Editorially, he could get the performance he needed, so he wasn't relying on their acting. You know, if anything good came out, it made it better, but he didn't need it. You know, he didn't need, the camera did all the talking. You know, it's like cinematic language. But yeah, I think that's a fair case to make, that he was.
I mean, that's just like a one-off. You know, I mean, that's like it's. I suppose everyone's an individual, and there's just unique. Everyone's unique, I suppose.
Yeah, there's no two people that are the same.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, so that's the extent of my involvement with
the mask. I mean, it's interesting to learn. Anyway, because it's interesting because sort of where I had a look at some of your other, like you say, you worked with Del Toro, which I think's you know, another visionary kind of filmmaker, and it's funny because I think, you know, his first American film was a Mimic, and then which he didn't have a very good time on. I think he released a director's cut some years later, and then he did Blade 2, and then Blade 2 kind of got him Hellboy, and then he could get Ron Perlman, and I wouldn't know. I wish we could have got Hellboy 3, you know, but then they did. Then they did the reboot, which was recently. But yeah, I mean, but that
I was actually the first hire on Mimic. I worked on it when it was still a short, and when it was part of an anthology that Miramax was developing called Light Years. And that's how I left ILM, was to work with Del Toro on Mimic. And I was introduced to Del Toro by Matthew Robbins, who of course co-wrote, you know, Mimic, and co-wrote Crimson Peak. I was friends with Matthew from my time in the early years. I was at ILM. He actually went to do some kind of, you know, he was a speaker at a film conference, or he was doing some kind of educational lecture, and met Del Toro and called me up at ILM and said, I met a young director and you're going to work with him. His name is Guillermo del Toro. And I said, okay. And then a few months later, Guillermo came up to screen Kronos, and I
was going to say, yeah, wow. I mean, is that? I mean, I'm guessing that's the first time you saw Kronos. I mean,
yeah, so it was projected at ILM in the C Theater, and then I met with Del Toro about another project of his called. Its working title is Spanky, but he went on to change it to Mephisto's Bridge, and that's on his list of films he's never produced. And that was. I did some concepts for that. And then Mimic was, like I said, Mimic was a 30-minute short. And then I did the creature design for that. And actually it was the creature design that I worked on with Del Toro that, when the studio saw it, got really excited by it, and then approached Del Toro to make it into a feature film. And so I'd already had a deal to leave ILM and to work with Guillermo on Mimic for one period of about 6 or 8 months. And then when they decided to make it into a feature, it was going to take much longer. And I had taken a leave of absence from ILM for 6 or 7 months, and I was supposed to come back. And so I had to call ILM and say, well, I'm going to stay longer away. And they said, no, don't worry, you know. So I kept a phone at ILM for like over a year. I had a phone and I had a drawer with all my work. I didn't move anything out, you know, because I was coming back. But then after working with Del Toro, and you're right, it was a very problematic movie on a lot of levels. And it took a very long time. I ended up being on that film for well over a year. And then it didn't get the support of the
Weinstein.
So it really, if you actually get the director's cut on, if you have it on.
Oh yes, got it on Blu-ray. Yeah,
yeah, you can see me. You can see me. I'm in the. There's me talking about the creature, and I'm like, 25 years younger.
No, it's. I mean, I like it. I like the film. You know, I mean, I thought it. You know, I mean, like there's a lot of problems and it was a lot of stress for him. You know, Del Toro. I think he had. I think he was like, if that's how they make films here. I mean, that's I think. He must have not. He almost wanted. I'm guessing he must have felt like giving up on Hollywood.
Oh yeah, it was hard. It was a hard movie. They didn't give him, once they got him to sign on the dotted line, like they didn't give him what he needed. Like he wanted to cast his female lead that he had wanted to cast was Jennifer Jason Leigh. And if you look at her physical type, it would have been a very different movie because she's very nimble and thin boned and I think like even comes across as like a much more of a like a smaller human. Like her anatomy and her essence is more slender and I think that there was a seriousness that she presented in her acting that was would have, I think, resonated with the character of the doctor and the scientist in a different way than Mira Sorvino. And Mira Sorvino was pushed on him because she was dating Quentin Tarantino at the time, and she'd won the Oscar for the Woody Allen film that she did. And they basically were really into Tarantino, of course, and they really pushed Del Toro on, you got to use her. And I think that's just one of many stories like that.
There's so many. I mean, it was just so many. I mean, like, I think he had a better time, I think, doing Blade 2. It was a lot better. I think he had a good time. They shot it in Europe. They shot it in Prague, right? Blade 2. And,
yeah. I worked on that film as well. I was one of the, I did a lot of the weapons designs and worked with Del Toro on, conceptualizing stuff. Wayne Barlow was there. Mike Mignola and I shared an office. Tim Bradstreet. And that was a lean production. I mean, we got a lot done really fast, and I love Blade 2. I think it's the best of the Blade films.
So many people that so many people I know say, oh yeah, Blade 2 is their favorite, but I think I love the original, but I think there's some interesting things as a vampire film in Blade 2. I think there's a lot of interesting kind of as a vampire film. It's interesting. I prefer the first film, but that's just me. But I think that the original was just so, I suppose when it came out, this was just amazing. The bloodbath sequence.
And it was like The Matrix, right?
Yeah.
It was a game changer. It changed everything. And so I guess as a sequel, Guillermo took it in a different way, And I just think for me, I like the first one very much, but there's something about like the second film it's almost goes into parody at times. It goes so extreme that you're kind of like, this is just parody, right? And he tried so many interesting things that didn't like all work, but he was way ahead of the curve, I think, in the things he was trying to accomplish. And yes, you're right. Like he was able to deliver a lot more on Hellboy.
I think, you know what? I think if you watch Blade 2, specifically, it's got that anime, Japanese anime influence, especially in the sword fighting and the characters and the design and like the kind of things in the sewers. It's a bit like Mimic, that kind of the sewers and and Kronos. Obviously all these kind of themes and his interests and his imagination were were just all on the screen. You know?
Yeah, it's definitely, he made it his own. And, you know,
I think
I
it's funny
think,
as well. I think Wesley Snipes has said that Blade 2 was his favorite of the series, you know.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's like I guess people think it's like the Road Warrior of the series, you know. It's like
yeah,
you know,
that's a good analogy. Yeah, there was something more accessible in some ways, But yeah, and then the last thing, then Pacific Rim was the last thing I worked on with him. I did a little bit of work for Hellboy 2, but I was working on Avatar at that time, so I was doing some stuff in the evenings and weekends, and then Pacific Rim, and then I got a call from him a couple of years ago to work on Fantastic Voyage that he was developing, but I think that got set aside somehow. So.
Did you do Shape of Water? The Shape of Water?
No,
No.
no, that was Guy Davis who did most of the the mechanical design, the kinds of things I would have been doing. Guy Davis did, and that movie kind of came out of nowhere because he'd worked so hard. I knew about Crimson Peak way years and years before, and he'd been working on that. And Matthew Robbins worked on the original draft with on Crimson Peak, and I think that I remember just the amount I heard about Crimson Peak and what it was and the ghost story and and then it's like then that came and I don't think it performed as well as anybody had hoped. But then it was like, and then Shape of Water. You know, it's like boom. It was like he had that whole thing going on the side, you know. And then when that one was done, he just stuck it in and went. So he's an amazing individual. Like he is.
It's like a like a commercial film. Then he'll do something artistic. Then he'll do a commercial film. Then he'll do something artistic.
I think
it's like Pan's Labyrinth. He'll do the Hellboy, and then he'll do Pan's Labyrinth. It's like.
Have you seen The Devil's Backbone?
Yes. That was Leguizamo, right? Leguizamo wasn't that? John Leguizamo? I'm sure he was in that.
No, The Devil's Backbone is the Spanish language.
Spanish movie, yeah, Spanish film. Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, I got the box set of, I think it was, it had Kronos, Pan's Labyrinth, and The Devil's Backbone. Yeah. It's quite definitely, it's quite scary. I mean, I saw The Orphanage, which he produced as well.
I think The Devil's Backbone might be my favorite film of Del Toro's because he's so on point, you know, it's so unique to his vision of like story and the way that it's so visual. The whole story is you really barely need the dialogue, but I love a lot of his films. That one in particular I think is underrated. Not a lot of people talk about it, and I just think I've watched it many times and it stands up. It's just a really amazing movie.
Yeah, no, it's I'm gonna have to watch it again. Yeah, I'm just having a look at it now, but no, you're right. I got confused. It wasn't Leguizamo that was in it, but no, it's a Spanish. Yeah, I'm gonna have to watch it again. It's been a while.
Leguizamo was in. It's funny you should bring up Leguizamo because I'm pretty sure he was in David Goyer's directorial debut.
Zigzag. Yeah, Zigzag. Yeah, that's quite a good little kind of independent kind of drama. And that's like I think he did that before he did Trinity. And then I think he did Zigzag and then he did Trinity. But then
I was also the first hire on Blade Trinity also with Goyer. And I've worked a lot for David on projects that never came into being. For a while, David was going to do Princess of Mars. So I did a bunch of concepts for what then became John Carter Mars, right? But it was called Princess of Mars.
I mean, are you a fan of like, I suppose you're a fan of anything really. I mean, are you a fan of horror or?
I like everything.
You like did you like Hellraiser?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I saw it in the theater, man. It was great. Again, but I think what's so funny is there's aspects of it that were like completely game changers, like transformed the genre, right? But then there were also tropes in it that were so easy to identify that I think it became like self-referential at some point, especially the sequels and things.
The sequels, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's like it always tends to be the way. I mean, I think, you know, like Del Toro could do something interesting with Hellraiser. You know, I mean.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I mean, the thing about Del Toro is if he puts his mind to it, like he can do anything. Like so there was a short period of time where he was going to do this Western, The Left Hand of Darkness, which is the Monte Cristo, the kind of Monte Cristo, but it's set in a Western and like it's set in on the Mexican border. And it was what he was doing, he was developing it with Zortrope, American Zortrope, with Francis Coppola. And it was announced as, you know, a project, and I think they had gotten the script to Brad Pitt as a potential lead. And I worked on that for a little while, which was before Blade 2. And what's so weird, the reason I bring it up is because it's like one of the best scripts I've ever read, and I've read lots of scripts. And so he could have easily done a Western, which you kind of think about as canon of work. You wouldn't necessarily think, oh, he would do a Western, but he could easily have done a Western.
He could easily. I mean, his limitless talents could easily, you know, he's kind of able to work in just
any genre.
Any genre, yeah.
I mean, if he announced he was doing a musical, I would believe it. You know, for a while he was pitching a Jabba the Hutt movie where Jabba the Hutt's like the Godfather, and it was. Did
he produce Pinocchio, the new Pinocchio? There's a Pinocchio film, I think.
He's got his own Pinocchio project in development.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah,
Guy Davis, the Shape of Water production designer, is involved with that. I know.
I mean, I bet he's got. I mean, I was going to his IMDb, and he's got so many. You know.
Yeah, he's a mogul. He's a mogul. You know, he's the closest thing there is to a mogul. Like he's got it all done. It's
unbelievable. It's just
nothing he can't do at this point. He's got. You know, he can run 6 projects at a time, and he can produce and
you think where he started. You know, I mean, Kronos was a very interesting. Ron Perlman was in that as well.
Yeah.
So you know, so that's funny. I mean, that was certainly an interesting film.
But if you spend time with Del Toro, and I was really fortunate because when I worked on Mimic, like I was his connection. Because I had worked on Jurassic Park, and because I knew, you know, like the inside workings of visual effects, and he liked my design work. I was like servicing a lot of his development as somebody who was trying to make things happen. Like he would ask me about like, well, what's hard about this? What's hard about that? You know, like, tell me about this, tell me about that. But he was doing that with multiple people. I mean, he was a sponge, you know, he like just sucked up how things were made, like how things worked. I mean, he was, but in that first year of Mimic, like we were inseparable. So I spent a lot of time with him when, you know, going to dinner, I met Ron Perlman then way before I worked on Blade, you know.
I met Ron Perlman, what was it? Must have been 2019. Mm-hmm. And I was introduced to him by an actor, Michael Madsen. Actually, he is someone I've collaborated with on a project, and we were in Wales, and it was at a convention, but I was with Michael, and Michael took me up to this green room, and he introduced me to Ron Perlman, and he was big guy, you know, and he was just really cool. He's a
really great guy.
I mean, he did Beauty and the Beast, you know, and which was it was an interesting TV series, you know. So
Quest for Fire, man, that's where it all goes back. In fact, the other actor from Quest for Fire showed up at dinner when I met Ron the very first time. I was like sitting with both of them going, oh. You know what? It's been nice chatting with you, but I got a bunch of emails stacking up and to get to my real job.
Yeah, no problem. And it's still early as well, isn't it? So I've got to.
Yeah, 9:30, perfect timing.
But you know, thanks for chatting. You know, and it's an absolute pleasure, and I'll stay in touch. I mean, when the book comes out, you know, I'll send you a copy and. You know, I've had a really difficult spring because the school has been dealing with COVID, and I was promoted into another level of leadership. And so I haven't been very effective in answering emails. And I know you've reached out a couple of times, but I mean, it's the time we're in. You know, it's I completely understand. It's just it's a crazy, strange times, you know. I mean, and you've got your own life and you're busy,
Yeah.
and you've got to get on with things, and everyone has their own, has their own thing
Well,
to get on with.
what I'd say is if you use my TyRuben@mac.com email address, if you have any other questions or anything, that you can always write me. I'll try to be better at responding.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, if you wanted to, I mean, if you want to email me like your story or your memories, you'd be more than welcome to.
Well, yeah, I think what I've told you today is about.
It's pretty much it. It's pretty much
but
it.
Maybe if you think of a question, like I was going through some paperwork recently that was for school, but I was trying to think if I had anything of it, like old storyboards or any of that stuff, and I don't seem to, but I'll keep an eye out and think about it. If you already connected with Benton, like Benton was the main guy.
Oh, Benton, yeah. Well, I'm in touch with Benton. Yeah, I've Zoomed with Benton. He's a great guy. I mean, everyone's been so nice to me, and and thank you anyway, TyRuben. It's great to listen to learn and to learn about the creative process and what like yourself and many others have done, and it's always it's to learn. It's learning and archiving, learning and archiving.
Curating.
Exactly, curating. Yes, exactly. But take care and and thank you.
Yeah, nice speaking with you. Have a great day.
You too.
Okay, bye.